Chapter 1. September 9, 2009. Richmond, Virginia. Henry really loved the night and his graveyard shifts at Larkin's. He loved the shadows and the dark corners that the lights high in the ceiling somehow failed to illuminate. He loved the unexpected caves made by lumber or boxes or concrete that happened to be stacked in a certain way, even if the next day, like sandcastles, the caves were gone. He loved the shadows of the garden center that darkened and grew and turned black and gray as night fell. He loved the garden center's earthy smells. The stalks, the fronds, the leaves, the tiny pots, the ferns and hanging baskets. Tonight he'd found a shaded corner in the back, where he was deadheading flowers and watering flats of petunias, dahlias, pansies, calendula, and sweet alyssum, snapdragons, chrysanthemums, asters. The autumn roses were next. Henry inhaled, drinking in all the scents, the green, the earth, the shadows. He had never told anyone that shadows had colors and scents and that green shadows had the richest, the deepest smell. The garden center was his favorite place. He wanted to work there full time. Instead he was a floater. Sort of. Henry never told anyone a good many things. He'd learned early on that he was different from everyone around him in a deep basic way. People didn't like differences. They would hurt you if they thought you were different. No one would ever know he had another secret besides smelling shadow scents. He could disappear. Somehow he knew how to pull the shadows around him like a soft, soft cloak. The colors of his skin, his clothes, his black hair became ghosts of themselves, faint enough for whatever was around him to show through. Even the sounds he made in the shadows were muted to barely audible whispers. He'd learned long ago how to pretend to be invisible in a crowd. He tried not to use the shadows at work, but a lot of the time Carlene seemed to forget he was in the garden center, and that was fine with him. Even if he didn't love working with plants so much, Henry had to be in the garden center right now. That was another of Henry's deep and dark and long kept secrets. He sensed when things were coming, waited moments charged with meaning. He rarely knew what the moments would be, and some he might have avoided if he had, like the time the dog at his last group foster home attacked him. He knew that they were coming and where. One was coming to the garden center. Henry shook his head to clear his thoughts. It did him no good to waste time trying to focus on these impending moments. He went back to deadheading and spraying the plants. Plants Henry had found were often a lot nicer than people. Thorns and leaves might tear or prick his skin, but they never bit him or snapped at him like cats and dogs did, or even some people. Plants never looked past him or through him or talked around him the way the guys at work did, even at lunch when they would go over to Jason's Deli or Chipotle or out front to Dominic's Garden Grill. He was used to it. It had been happening to him all his life, including in the foster homes he had been in and out of, until he was 18. Still hurt. Henry was scanning the next flat of pansies, a little dry, a few deadheads, when he jerked up, the watering can spilling on the concrete floor. The impending moment's weight pressed against Henry. He listened hard, his head cocked toward the doorway 40 or 50 odd feet away. 3 weeks of training and orientation. I told you that, right? This is the garden center, obviously. Back this way is the storage room where we keep the special order bins, appliances on clearance. Carlene, the senior day manager, was giving a new guy a tour. Her voice trailed off as she disappeared back into the main store. The new guy, red hair falling over his face, stood in the doorway and stared at Henry. Henry felt his gaze as if it were directly on his skin. His body responded, and he knew the redhead was feeling the same things. He was Mr. Curry? The redhead took a step back and turned, looked at Henry again and followed Carlene. Henry closed his eyes as he inhaled, exhaled. He smelled the new guy mint, scented soap, tea tree tingle shampoo, Old Spice shaving cream and deodorant, desire and the sharp, acrid smell of fear. Smells, scents, odors. Henry had been 13 when he began smelling the emotions of those around him. At first it had been just the slightest sense, as if carried by a breeze from far away. It had taken him a long while before he could match scent to emotion. At times he had felt almost overwhelmed in a tangle of sensory input. The worst had been when one of his foster parents had taken him to a revival meeting, and he'd run screaming from the church. They had called social services to come get him that afternoon. The doctor said nothing was wrong with the boy, except maybe stress and being overly sensitive. Henry's next foster parents were more understanding and let him wear a bandana over his mouth and nose, until he sorted through the scents, the feelings, and how to tune them out, learned how to not smell. Thankfully, they didn't take him to any church revival meetings. Now Henry could smell when he wanted to or not smell. Fear was sharp, pungent, layered. Anger burning and dark, hot, sometimes cold. Cold anger was the worst. Desire sweet, strong. Only recently had Henry developed the ability to detect the distinctive sense of more subtle emotions, despair, melancholy, and anxiety. For one intense moment, Jamey couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Desire consumed him. That guy in the garden center. Night black hair, thick, streaked with silver. Medium build, medium height. Pointed ears tufted with black hair. When Jamey closed his eyes and looked again, the ears were completely normal. No points, no extra hair. The manager called his name, her voice faint and distant, and he started to leave, but he stopped in the doorway to look back. The desire was still there. The second time it was even harder to turn away. But he did. He had to. Jamey needed this job. The money his mother had given him after his father kicked him out of the house, spewing Bible verses as he threw stuff in his car. What Jamey called his maternal severance package was about to run out. And although neither his friend Charlie nor Al, Charlie's roommate, had said anything, Jamey was pretty sure the offer to sleep on the couch wasn't good. Indefinitely, even if he did keep his stuff in the trunk of his car. I always forget his name. Harvey. Horace. Harry. Henry Thorne. Carlene said. You'll meet everybody after training. Anyhow, this way, kitchen. Cabinets, special orders. Jamey decided not to mention that he'd seen pointed ears on this Henry Thorne. He'd always seen things no one else did. His mother had told him stories about baby Jamey and moving lights in the trees, and how he cried because no one would believe him. Everybody had laughed, saying they were fireflies or car lights. No, they were as big as my hand, so Jamey decided that some of the things were secrets because only he was aware of them, or would admit it. He wondered now about his grandfather and his mother's brother, and sometimes his mother. The green man and the green lady in the woods, the silver lady in the lake, and the goat-footed horned man. All secrets, optical illusions, and an overactive imagination, his mother said. He never told anyone about flying. It had been September, he'd been 6, and the teacher had sent him to the lower playground, out of sight of the school, to fetch left-behind equipment. Jamey stood for a moment at the top of the green hill, looking down at the empty playground. He started running and the wind caught him, or he caught the wind, and for one supreme minute he was airborne. It happened only twice more that fall on the lower playground, the last time in a swirl of leaves. Nor had he ever told anyone about the other, older memory of walking through a wall. He'd been at the back door, and then he found himself outside in the backyard. His mother had spanked him and yelled at him for lying. Jamey wondered if his mother still told baby Jamey stories he hadn't seen or heard from anyone in his family since the end of summer school, other than the seemingly endless anti-gay tracts his mother kept mailing him, the weird little cartoons like Doomtown Sin City and the Gay Blade, and endless photocopies of Leviticus 18 verse 22 and 2013 and 1 Corinthians 6 verses 9 to 11 and the rest. Throwing them into the recycling bin made him feel guilty. The thought of going home to Fredericksburg terrified him. Even the thought of calling was scary. When he did get up his nerve to call his little brother and sister, his dad caught them and blocked the phone number. Charlie had offered to let Jamey use his cell phone, but Jamey had been afraid to touch it. Using a payphone now seemed like a luxury. If he didn't get this job, pay attention to what this woman is saying, Jamey. Pay attention, he told himself. You had a year at VCU, so you might be interested in our tuition reimbursement program. Alright, come in the office, let me give you the forms you need to fill out to get on payroll, your fingerprints for the background check, signatures on the privacy waivers, the usual. Think I will start you as a floater at first on October 5th after 3 weeks paid training starting next week. Jamey looked back one more time in the direction of the garden center. Did that guy really have pointed ears? Atlanta, Georgia. The kids were in bed. Danny was on the night shift at the hospital, and Ella finally had some time to herself. She was reading when the alarm sounded, wind chimes, silvery, sweet, faint. She closed the book and sat very still. She hadn't heard the alarm in how many years? This persona, Ella Lewis, had never heard those faint wind chimes. Silvery, sweet, far away. A false alarm? She would have to wait, that was protocol. But already she felt the edges of this persona start to unravel. She sniffed the barest of traces, but she recognized both scents. It wasn't a false alarm. October 9, 2009. When Henry moved his marker to in on the staff board, he saw that James Curry was in too. Just looking at his name, as Henry had for the past week, ever since Jamey had gotten back from 3 weeks training on Monday, made him pause and catch his breath. He dreamed of Jamey more than once. Henry had wanted to speak to him, to say something, anything, but no opportunity other than glances across the break room had presented itself. But that was just an excuse. When he smelled fear, he smelled both Jamey's and his own. Rehearsing while he sorted his clothes at the laundromat or rode the bus to and from Short Pump, or alone in the garden center, didn't seem to help. Some of the dogwood saplings had seemed especially interested, which he actually found annoying. Henry knew he had choked, which was stupid. He was stupid. Stupid. But he was still scared. Henry figured out being gay had to be one more of his secrets in high school. It wasn't safe to be out, not at Deep Run High School in Henrico County, nor in the mob of kids in the different foster homes. A girl had been pushed down the stairs, and the bad thing had happened to a guy at the bus stop. But that was then. Jamey had looked back at him 3 times, glances Henry could still feel. Never mind. It was going to be a long day, starting with the register, then paints for most of the morning. Only 1 hour in the garden center before lunch, and stocking light bulbs and the loading docks in the afternoon. Paints sucked. People tried to ask him questions about colors, though clearly he wasn't the one in charge. A woman last week had wanted to know what he thought about the colors she was considering for her son's room. He was about Henry's age and she just wasn't sure. White with blue trim, but which white? Dover white? Furor? West Highland? White duck, Narcissus, dreamy. She liked dreamy, did he? Telling her he was a little colorblind and wasn't in charge of paints anyhow didn't help. She seemed determined to go through all 204 shades of white, and Henry was sure she would start the 230 shades of blue after that. It had taken him a while to get her over to Frank. When Henry checked into paints, Frank was busy with a customer, so he pointed with his thumb to several boxes that needed opening, sorting, and shelving. Henry nodded and got to work. After mid-morning break, he drifted to the garden center and sorted bags of mulch and potting soil, figuring out how he could talk to Jamey, no matter how scared he was or how scared Jamey seemed to be. He'd almost succeeded at lunch on Wednesday. Jamey had been sitting right beside him, and Henry had felt a surge of energy when their knees bumped. He growled when he felt and smelled Jamey's gaze again. The scent of desire was almost overwhelming. Jamey looked away nervously and started talking about a dream, a recurring dream, and what did the guys think it meant, running in a store? And the guys had laughed at him and Jamey had shut up. Henry had almost spoken up about his recurring dream, but when they laughed at Jamey, he gulped down his words. They felt like little stones settling into his stomach. Today lunch break came and went, but no Jamey. Henry got ready to head to the garden center when Carlene tapped him on the arm. Damn. Light bulbs, remember? Henry grumbled inwardly. He smiled at his boss and went to work on the light bulbs. He didn't look up until he turned down the right aisle and there was Jamey setting up the stepladder, next to a flat cart loaded with boxes and boxes of bulbs. Henry, right? Carlene said I should help you with the bulbs, yeah? Start handing me the Phillips 250s right there. Okay? Henry grabbed the first box and handed it up to Jamey, close enough to notice the curve of Jamey's neck, the brightness and softness of his red hair, his freckled skin, and those startling blue eyes. He inhaled Jamey's scent. I was thinking about your dream, Henry croaked as he picked up the next box. Yeah. The dream about running in a store? Jamey looked down at Henry as if deciding how much he could tell this boy. Henry was convinced that people didn't talk to him because they thought he was weird. But Jamey smiled as if he'd reached some decision, and Henry smelled a change in his scent, a lightening of the fear. That dream? I'm never talking about dreams with those guys again. I'd rather not imagine what kind of dreams they have. Anyway, I was being chased here in this store, through paints, through fashion bath, into roofing and lumber, and things kept shifting in the store. Something chased me everywhere and finally into the garden center. Jamey paused and looked hard at Henry as if making another decision. I don't know if I should say this, but I didn't have on any clothes. Boy, am I glad I didn't tell them that. Then I woke up. What do you think it means? Henry stared at Jamey in wonder. Jamey's dream mirrored one of his own. Recurring since the age of 13 dreams, except he was running toward something instead of away from it. He would run and run and run down the aisles of a huge store, far bigger than this giant warehouse with shelves that reached high over his head, so high he couldn't see the tops, packed with so many things that threw shadows in various shapes and sizes and darknesses. Ahead, feet slapping the floor. Then, suddenly green shadows and trees were all around him and he'd wake up. After these dreams everything ached, especially his arms and legs, his jaws, his teeth. You okay? Jamey reached out to touch Henry on the shoulder. Henry twitched. At the sharp jolt of what felt like static electricity, someone cleared their throat. Both boys whipped their heads around to see a dark-haired older woman a few feet away, looking very impatient. Excuse me? Can you tell me where I can find bathroom fixtures to match this? She held up a blue and gray floor tile sample. I'm redoing my bathroom and everything just has to match. Sure, follow me. Catch you later, Henry. Jamey headed off with the dark-haired woman behind, who was talking about how hard it was to find faucets in the right color. She'd looked all over Richmond, Home Depot, Pleasance Hardware, Noland Company, and she did not want to drive to Gaithersburg to the great indoors. Traffic on 9-5 was a nightmare. An unfamiliar warmth spread out like a slow tide, down his chest into his heart, through his groin, until Henry was aroused and embarrassed and scared. At the same time, he grabbed a box of light bulbs to hide his erection and willed it away as quickly as he could. He walked toward the garden center, without turning around, but he knew Jamey looked back. The dark-haired woman kept talking, reciting the list of stores she had been to in Richmond: Ferguson Bath and Kitchen Gallery, Richmond Plumbing Specialties. Jamey clenched and unclenched his fists behind his back. His right hand still felt like he was touching Henry. Why in the world had he touched Henry in the first place? That was incredibly stupid. Jamey glanced back. He could see Henry's ears, pointed, tufted with black hair like before. What was that energy jolt about? He'd never felt that before. The woman finally stopped talking, and now she was checking her tile sample against what was there, muttering she hoped Larkins could help her. Henry had other recurring dreams, most of them about his mother. They were all he had of her. A woman with golden eyes and long black hair leaning over him. The same woman running with him, touching him, holding him close against her, pressing his temples as she whispered into his skin, "Stay inside, stay inside." In other dreams she whispered, "Forget, forget." Occasionally he'd dream of his father, but he was always a shadow behind his mother. When Henry was almost 13, his foster mother was scandalized to discover he didn't know all about who Jesus was, so she made him memorize the Lord's Prayer and the Apostles' Creed. After that, Henry had prayed to God and Jesus, begging both to help him find his mother, and that she would come for him, that the next knock on the door would be his mother, come to take him home and tell him that she'd always loved him. So far, his prayers had gone unanswered. It wasn't long after that their family dog started getting hysterical when Henry was within 10 feet of it. They sent him back. He never stayed long with any foster family. If they had pets, his time with a family could be measured in days, once even in hours. And there was that incident when he ran screaming out of church, trying to escape the smells. Social services gave up when he was 16 and in his 6th high school, 4 in Henrico County, 2 in the city of Richmond. They placed him in a group home and his 7th high school, Deep Run, where he spent 2 very lonely years until he was 18. That was a year and a half ago. The group home foster father had given Henry just enough money to rent a tiny 1-room apartment in the basement of a Longwood University professor's house on 3 Chopped Road and get a 3-month bus pass on the GRTC. The foster father had known someone at Larkin's too. Henry figured the man must have felt really sorry for him after what had happened with their new dog. The scars from that last attack ran down Henry's right thigh and leg. The professor, Dr. Kathleen Malloy, explained she was on the road a lot, a 2-hour round-trip commute to Longwood down in Farmville and back, and her fiancé was up in Ann Arbor finishing his PhD, so she was often gone on the weekends. She wanted someone to keep an eye on the house, pick up the mail and packages, and newspapers, turn the porch light on and off. other odd tasks as needed. Since then it had been a steady routine of Larkins, a lot of ramen noodles, mac and cheese, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, getting the mail, collecting packages and newspapers, riding the bus until that moment in the garden center when Jamey had looked back at him. Excuse me? I want to see some wood and laminate samples like Pergo. Do you have Pergo here? I'm thinking of taking up the carpet in my living room. Ronnie, I already told you they have Pergo. Do you ever listen to me? Kid, tell him you have Pergo. Henry nodded and smiled at the very earnest bespectacled man and his taller, chatty gray-haired friend and took them over to flooring and tile, where he introduced them to Alonzo, the flooring guy in charge of Pergo. He looked back at the two men once. The taller one had a hand laid carelessly on the shoulder of Ronnie, the shorter one. Henry stared. It was a revelation. Just regular guys. Maybe sort of like me, like Jamey. Do they know how to disappear too? Henry had never really met a gay person before. He'd been too afraid to talk to some kids at school whom he had guessed were. Here were two men, a couple, and Larkin's buying flooring. He walked back to lighting, a bit dazed as he took down the ladder and put up the platform cart, wondering when he would see Jamey again and what he would say and what Jamey would say, wondering if Jamey would touch him and then he'd touch him back and tell him he'd seen these two guys, regular guys like anybody else. Henry, Luke got sick, so I need you on the graveyard shift Saturday, okay? Was Carleen, her ubiquitous clipboard in her hand, a pen stuck in her thick black hair. According to some of the guys, she slept with pen in hair and clipboard in hand. If he hadn't spaced out, Henry would have seen her coming and disappeared long enough for her to go on to the next item on her list. Then he could have drifted back to his plants. For the first time he didn't want the graveyard shift. He didn't know where Jamey lived or what his number was, and now Henry wouldn't see him until Monday. Work Saturday night broke the Jamey spell, at least temporarily. Unloading masonry, ceramic floor tiles, cinder blocks, landscaping stones, and bags of mulch and potting soil did the trick. Henry didn't have the energy for anything else except pick up, carry, stack, drop, repeat until he got a break, and dragged himself into the men's room, into the handicapped access stall in the back corner. Henry grabbed hold of the arm railing and leaned into the wall, then slumped, slid to the floor, pressed his forehead against the cool flatness and closed his eyes. Just for a minute. Thorne? You in there? Anybody seen Thorne? It was Eduardo, a night manager. Looking for him. Henry jerked awake. Where am I? The bathroom in the handicap stall, and he was stark naked. Where are my clothes? I closed my eyes to take a short break. And my clothes are gone? Is that my t-shirt? Henry grabbed his shirt hanging from the hook on the stall door. One leg of his jeans stuck out from under the metal wall. How did I get so dirty and naked? Twigs in my hair? What's this in my teeth? Hair? Fur? Am I going crazy? Sliding to the floor and pressing his head against the wall was the last thing he remembered. Thorne? Where the fuck is that idiota? Eduardo was definitely pissed. Henry scrambled into his jeans, yanked his shirt over his head, and slammed the door open. His New Balance walkers, one last guilt-driven gift from his group home foster father after the dog savaged Henry's other pair, were, thank God, right there in the corner on top of his red Larkin's vest. God only knew where his socks and underwear were. Henry jammed on his shoes and ran out into the store to find Eduardo. I was in the garden center, I couldn't hear you. I'm so sorry. What the fuck happened to your clothes? Were you trying to fuck a holly bush? Never mind, your ride's out front, get out of here. Take a damn shower, you stink. Henry ran. If he missed his ride, it was a long walk home or a long hour and a half wait for the first Sunday morning bus. At least Jamey wouldn't see him like this. His ride home was gone by the time he got to the front of the store. Henry sighed. Frank in Paints, who sometimes noticed him waiting at the bus stop, had offered him a ride home if Henry was on time. He walked to the bus stop and sat down to wait. After he saw his reflection in the plexiglass wall of the stop, he pulled as much of the gray fur out of his teeth as he could. Gross. Ella eased herself out of bed very carefully and very slowly. She didn't want to wake Danny. He'd only been asleep for an hour. She grabbed her bathrobe from the foot of the bed, slipped into it and pulled it tight and close. She looked back at Danny, asleep on his side, the tension gone from his face. She wished it didn't hurt them so much when she left. She wished she could make him forget. She wished she cared more than it was possible for her to do. Marrying a mundane and having children was necessary, but doing so did complicate so many things. The alarm sounded again. Wind chimes silvery and sweet. She listened intently. At the bedroom window, pressing her cheek into the glass, the transformation began, a tiny fire at the edge of her awareness, like a leaf slowly burning, its edges curling up and dropping away into ash. When Henry closed the door to his apartment behind him and went into the bathroom, he finally got a good look at himself. No wonder the other people on the bus had looked at him so funny. Sleepwalking and sleep undressing and, apparently, sleep clothes ripping. His t-shirt and jeans looked as if someone had tried to claw them off his body. Everything smelled awful. His teeth hurt. His fingers and toes hurt. Henry shook his head. This didn't make sense, but then a lot of things that happened to him made very little sense. He yawned. He was bone-tired, way too tired to try and figure out what was happening, what had caused him to sleep so deeply that he couldn't remember falling into holly bushes or his clothes being ripped off. At least Dr. M was here this weekend, no caretaking work. And Jamey. Henry gave up, he was too tired to think. His t-shirt and jeans went into the wastebasket. Henry wondered if he had enough money to replace them at the thrift store. Then he lay down on top of the bedspread, thinking he should get up and take a shower, but he wanted to lie still for a minute. He woke up from a dark and deep sleep that had lasted until late in the afternoon. Getting out of the bed took forever. His body ached even more than when he'd fallen asleep. Henry dragged himself into the shower, and when the water was as hot as he could bear it, he stood there, letting the water beat on his head. He was hungry, he wanted meat. He toweled off in front of the TV. Larkin's was on the news. A body had been found near a dumpster by the loading dock that morning. It had apparently been there since sometime early. Chapter 4. Jamey woke up naked in a bedroom he didn't know. The room was small and dark. He stretched out both arms. On the left, wood paneling the wall. On the right, flesh, and he remembered where he was, in a room 2 floors below the safe house. The list of what happened to get him and Henry in this bed together was unbelievable, from sex for the first time to the watchers. Jamey shuddered, remembering the screeching and keening. They were still out there. He and Henry would have died if not for Dr. M, who said she was a witch. He was confused and tired, but for now he was safe. How do you thank someone for that? What's going to happen? There were just too many questions. He carefully touched Henry's hairy pointed ears, his shoulder, his arm, his back, his thick black and gray hair, the pentacle on his chest. Jamey couldn't go home. He couldn't even call Charlie to tell him to look after his stuff. There didn't seem to be any phones in this house. What would I tell him? Hey Charlie, I did right by Henry. Yeah, I really like the sex. Yeah, I want to do it again. Can you look after my stuff? These monsters are after us. If my mother calls when she calls. For a brief, sharp moment he wanted his mother. But last night he had had sex with a boy. This boy whose body he was exploring. Would she let him come home? But how can this be wrong? It's not wrong to love someone. That's in the Bible, too. He made a new road down Henry's spine as he felt Henry waking up. I want this, I want this, I want this. His road looped and curled on Henry's buttocks, then curved around to Henry's penis, which grew hard in his hand as he stroked it. Jamey pushed the voice of his mother and her persistent Bible verses as far away as he could, along with her fears and his own. Henry yawned as he slowly turned over, his own hands exploring until he found Jamey's erection, his balls, his mouth, each discovery leading to the next, each found quicker than the last. Jamey had never felt more awake. Each touch seemed to create an energy charge, as if a current was passing back and forth, skin to skin. It felt wonderful. Let me show you something, Jamey said a while later, his voice thick. You get here and do the same to me, yeah? I saw this in a book. There are books about this stuff? Damn, Henry thought. Here it is 2009 and I know so little about almost everything. Being gay just happens to be first on the list. Should we use a condom maybe? Henry hoped Jamey couldn't see how embarrassed he was at how little he knew. He kept stroking Jamey, knowing at the very least he was learning this boy's body. A body he very much wanted to. No. Jamey kissed him. We don't have any. One of the books said don't swallow. Besides, I've never done anything except kiss with another guy. I've only done that with you. Okay, let's try it without swallowing. Here. Okay, I get it, Henry muttered as he followed Jamey's instructions to rearrange themselves so that they could take each other at the same time. This is only our second time. I don't know anything either except for what I read and saw in the book. Jamey grinned. There was a dog in the picture. A dog. It was lying there on the floor like they were going for a walk and got distracted. The two guys were lying on the floor too. This bed's more comfortable. So we don't have to, oh never mind. Henry laughed and licked Jamey's cock, eliciting the same in return. Jamey groaned at the reciprocal intensity, the new quick give and take, the call and response to each other. He had never felt so excited, so exhilarated in his whole life. If the room were bigger and there had been more space between bed and wall, they would have fallen off far more times than they did. Henry, Jamey gasped. It's about. Whoa man, that's a lot of stuff. It's all over everything, you're like a fountain. Henry came a beat later. By then they were both on the floor. Yeah, messy. You had a lot too. Let me get something to clean up. Aren't you hungry? Jamey asked a sleepy while later as he stood in the doorway between the bathroom and the bedroom, leaning against the doorframe to take the weight off his still swollen foot. According to the clock in the bathroom, it was just after 2 in the afternoon. They had slept 9 hours. The last hour had been after sex. Yeah, I'm starving. I guess we should get dressed, go upstairs and eat. That big witch meeting is tomorrow night. Henry yawned. Oh, maybe we should take a shower first. He rolled onto his back, his eyes closed. A shower? Sure, but I want to ask you something. Jamey opened the closet, thinking he had seen a cane inside last night. There it was, carved and made of golden-colored wood. What's it like to change, to become a wolf? He sat down on the bed, cane in hand. Henry got up, turned on the little lamp and started pacing around the bedroom, which seemed even smaller as he touched and retouched the dresser, the clothes inside the bed, the quilt. Jamey, I don't know if I can tell you much more than what happened last night. As not something I've had to explain before, Jamey, so I'm not sure I'll get it. Right. I just figured out I wasn't dreaming, that it was really happening to me. He's like a caged animal at the zoo, Jamey thought as he examined the designs carved into the cane. I don't remember really. Every time I've changed from either human to wolf or wolf to human, I've been asleep except once, yesterday, last night, when you were holding me in the garden center. Henry paused as if he'd run out of pacing energy and sat next to Jamey. It itched at first, my skin, as the fur disappeared and changed into hair, and my bones in my blood like wave after wave, a loop of waves. My skin popped, bubbled, and there was this sharp pain in my back, but it was sweet too, and more pain in my joints that really hurt. Then I was there, the human me. You were holding me. I still seem to be changing, even though I'm in the same shape. I can smell more things, mostly the keeper's animals, their fear. I want to eat a lot of meat. I'm stronger, see. Jamey watched as Henry jumped off the bed and lifted the corner of the bed frame with one hand. I'm okay now, but before we had sex I wanted to run. Just run and run and run as a wolf. I think I need to change soon. Do you feel any different, God's spawn? Jamey thought for a moment. I like godling better, by the way. I don't know. Maybe. I remember things I kept secret when I was little, things I thought were dreams. I told you about seeing things and about flying. And I'm not sure what word I am looking for, teleporting. When I was very small. I don't know what to do with these memories. Do you remember being a wolf? Henry sat back down by Jamey and reached toward him, then stopped and let his hand drop on the bed. Yeah, I do, sort of, better than I did. I can't remember every detail yet, but before it was, well, sometimes like trying to remember a dream somebody else had, or a dream of a dream. That's changing. Though one less layer now. The wolf is stronger. I remember those guys trying to hurt me. I didn't really hurt any of them. I smelled one guy die and the other guy too. They fell, Henry said, his voice low. Maybe these witches can tell us how to do this. I sure don't know. Let's take that shower, get dressed and go eat. Jamey sat very still after Henry went into the bathroom. Would it have mattered if Henry had killed those men? He didn't know, he was just glad Henry hadn't. Knowing that, however, didn't get rid of the other fear. He thought he had pushed it away, but there it was, waiting for him. What he and Henry had done was wrong. His mother was a good person, So was his dad. Good people went to their church. They did good things. They helped the poor, the sick, the needy. They liked him. They asked about him when he wasn't there, stopping his parents in the parking lot. How is Jamey? How is he doing down in Richmond? What's he doing these days? Jamey wondered if the people at church asked after him now at all, and if they did, what his parents said in reply. His mother loved him, but Jamey had never been sure about his dad. Sometimes he thought his dad loved the idea of having a firstborn son more than Jamey himself. All this, he glanced at the rumpled bed and down at the floor, would cause his mother real pain. She'd never said so, but he was her favorite, her golden boy. She wanted the best for him, college, maybe even seminary, but definitely not this. He looked at his hands. He touched his mouth, stroked his chest. He touched his penis. He closed his eyes and pushed away his mother's voice, her Bible verses, her prayers, his dad's face, and then when he heard the water running, he went into the bathroom and pulled back the shower curtain. Hey, what was your name again? He grinned and stepped in. The growling Pomeranian met the boys at the top of the stairs. Gunther? How many times do I have to tell you? What are you boys' names? That. They are okay. There was a pause. Kathy said they were. I know, but he's only half werewolf. Another pause. I know that doesn't mean that much. Jamey and Henry, Jamey called back. He glared at the Pomeranian, who was clearly not impressed. For a four-legged mop, you have some serious attitude. He muttered. Gunther, I'm not going to change here. I'm wearing my pentacle, see? Helps me. Hold it back. Henry decided not to tell the Pomeranian he could feel the change waiting for him, a bright shadow gathering weight and energy so much that the pentacle wouldn't contain them. Besides, the pentacle was more for protection, apparently. Sex had let him hold back the change, but for how long? He didn't know. Maybe the dog did. Gunther, skeptical, stepped out of the way and let them into what seemed like the feeding area for all the keeper's animals. Litter boxes and bowls of dry food, water, and wet food were everywhere, along with shelves and cabinets and an old microwave covered in dust. I see you boys found some clothes. Just put those blankets you were wearing last night over there in that basket. There's food in the kitchen if you're hungry. Your raven is perched out in the Florida room sleeping. Bonnie gestured toward the refrigerator as she went on into the dining room. Globes of light, bigger than the ones Jamey'd seen outside, floated about the ceiling. Ordinary things and strange things. It was as if they were living on two different planets at the same time. One planet was the one he'd always thought, well, if he had thought about it at all, was real. Cool work. Charlie, his family, the church. Any others like Mars were too far away or made up like in Star Trek or Star Wars. That other planet, the one with werewolves and monsters and gods and witches, was supposed to be imaginary, too. Not anymore. Come on, let's go eat, Jamey. Henry tugged at his arm. Breakfast, rather. Lunch was more peanut butter and jelly, plus some yogurt, juice, and tea. Still hungry and craving meat, Henry found a microwavable beef pot pie and was about to heat it up when Bonnie wandered back into the kitchen. How about these cookies? Crackers. These donuts weren't too stale. He passed on the cookies, they were chocolate chip. Kathy, Dr. Malloy, left early. I don't know when she'll be back. Tomorrow. Monday for sure. Something about her house, her job. She's so upset about losing her house, poor thing. Watchers are usually active at night, that way they can minimize disclosure. Not that it matters here because the magic protecting the safe house has never been breached before. But I am willing to bet the ones looking for you two are going to risk the daylight and being seen. Best if you two stay inside and be safe. Kathy was explicit about that. You are not to leave the house. I'd like to call my roommate Charlie, ma'am, Jamey said. Let him know where I am, but I don't see a phone anywhere. I want to tell him I'm okay and ask him to tell my mother I'm okay when she calls. Bonnie frowned. Best ask Kathy when she gets here, or Ronan, he's coming as well. She wandered off, her animals trailing behind her. Witches began to arrive just before midnight. No pointed hats or warty noses. They looked like the customers Jamey had helped at Larkin's, except for the robes some were wearing. One or two Jamey had seen before, like the waiter who had looked after them at the Mexican place, a guy he was sure was on the ground crew at VCU. Another guy and two women he had waited on at Larkin's. each witch greeted the keeper and the two boys and then went down the stairs. Guided by blue fire they ignited in their hands. Jamey stopped counting after the 21st witch arrived. He was surprised at how ordinary they all looked. Dr. Malloy was the next to last to arrive. The man with her, Jamey guessed, was Ronan, who looked decidedly grumpy. "Henry, Jamey," she said when she saw them, and hugged both of them at the same time. "Alive and in one piece and no visible scars from last night, eh? Ronan, here they are." The two boys who woke up the watchers? Ronan was a man in his mid-30s. His hair pulled back into a long black braid and dark, almost black-brown eyes. He wore a deep red cloak like Dr. Malloy's, a blue polo shirt, and jeans. When he took Henry's hand, he appeared startled, as if he felt something clearly Henry wasn't aware of. He took Jamey's hand next, and looked even more startled. He turned to Dr. Malloy, nodding. "I see what you mean, Kath. The godling and the pet who isn't a pet. Your father's a mundane," Dr. M said at Henry's quizzical look. "And you were raised as a mundane, not a pet. I think I get it, and thanks for keeping us safe, Dr. M. Are you okay?" "I'm better now that Ronan's here." Dr. M gently squeezed Henry's hand. Henry nodded. "Yeah, I mean you lost your house and all your things, your books. Thanks for helping us." Jamey wanted to ask Ronan what he had felt when he touched each of them. Before he could gather up his nerve, Ronan turned to greet the next witch who had just entered the safe house. "Hey Gracie, I didn't see you there." "Yes, I think they are the real thing. Might be worth having your house burned up for." Almost. A silver-haired woman with dark eyebrows and glasses to match her hair was standing in the middle of the keeper's living room. She reminded Jamey of an elementary school teacher, except over her brown dress she wore a gauzy, white transparent robe. As she looked each boy up and down, Jamey felt as though he were being examined by a doctor. Her gaze made him feel naked. "Bonnie, it's good to see you. I think you may be right, Ronan. Kathleen, I would have sworn you'd done a false reading, but not now." Gracie was clearly disturbed. "It's all so unsettling and worrisome, not to mention scary. No. Watchers have been awakened in these parts for many, many years. Unfortunately, the mundanes have noticed. We all know what happened to the last prophetic pair, those two girls in France. Well, never mind that, it can't be helped. Let's go, the others are waiting. Bonnie, will you and Gunther lead the way?" she added to the keeper, who stood apart, waiting and holding the Pomeranian. The cats apparently had stayed in Bonnie's room. Dr. Malloy laughed at the look on both the boys' faces. "You two didn't think you'd be excluded from this meeting, did you? The cats in your raven, yes." The room to which the keeper and Gunther took them was on a floor below Jamey and Henry's bedroom, a level Jamey had not guessed existed. He wondered as they went down the last flight of stairs how deep they were and how many rooms were below this house and how many floors were they down so deep to prevent detection, to ensure the magical wards kept them safe. He squeezed Henry's hand and murmured close to his ear, "What do they mean, the real thing?" "Right. About what?" Henry shrugged and shook his head. After going down a hallway behind the keeper and her blue fire, past closed doors and dark side hallways, they stepped inside a room lit only by two candles on a small table and the fire crackling beneath a black cauldron. "Are we supposed to take off our clothes?" Henry whispered to Jamey when in the faint light, Jamey could see about half of the witches were naked or wearing just their robes. A few had canes like he did. One even had a walker. How had he missed seeing her come in? Even naked, the witches looked ordinary. Some of them stood in pairs. 2 men over there and 2 men in the corner. And 2 women across the room and 2 more by the door. Dr. M and Ronan right beside him. "Henry and me." "I don't know," Jamey whispered back and looked at Dr. Malloy and Ronan, wondering if either he or Henry were ready to see Dr. M without her clothes. It seemed almost like looking at his mother naked. Not that Dr. M hadn't seen a lot of him and Henry naked, with erections. Jamey pushed that thought away. "Dr. M? Are we supposed to take off our clothes?" "What? No, you're not witches, and even if you were, it'd be up to you. Some covens work naked or what we call skyclad and some not. It's optional. This is a council of covens, so each chooses here to stand beside Ronan and me." Jamey found himself desperately wishing he could ask Dr. Malloy or Ronan what was happening and what everything meant. The others were looking at him and Henry. He felt their gazes on his skin. as if he were walking through a curtain of rice. He tried to do exactly what Dr. M did, and Henry was trying to do the same thing. They stood near a small table covered with a midnight blue cloth. Jamey watched as a naked, gray-haired Asian man placed a tall green candle on a black iron stand. The table had been set with a golden cup, 2 knives, one black, the other white, 2 golden bowls, a pentacle, more candles, and what looked like a wand. A fresh loaf of bread was by the cup on a silver plate. Jamey had just gotten up the nerve to ask what the knives were for when a naked African-American, his hair in braids, walked over to the bowls. The man mixed the contents of the 2 bowls together and sprinkled the mixture on the floor. Henry leaned in to tell Jamey it smelled like salt and water. Then the cup filled with wine was passed and the bread. Gracie, the silver-haired school-teachery lady who seemed to be in charge, said, "May you never hunger. May you never thirst." When she passed him the cup and bread, he hadn't expected her to be naked under her transparent robe. He wished he could look away and not see. It felt like seeing his grandmother naked. Gracie drew a circle in the air, chanting, but Jamey could only catch a few words. A boundary between world's guardian and protector. She's doing magic. Oh God. Mama would be freaking, yelling, "This is evil. Satanic. The Watchers are devils. What am I doing here? I barely know Henry. Don't even know if I love him. I think I love him. But we just met. We've only had sex twice. It was great. I want to do it again. But Mama says that's wrong, that it's hateful to God. Dad hates me now. I saw it in his eyes. Didn't choose to be this way. If I could." Henry squeezed his hand and whispered, "I'm scared too." Jamey gave a long sigh and felt somewhat reassured, and only wondered a little how Henry could read his mind. He couldn't see any matches, but somehow Grace had lit all the candles on the floor and on the table. The tall green one in the stand burned in front of her. The air was thick with incense that came from pots in every corner of the room. Tiny faint pink fires glowed in the darkness. He wondered what the difference was between pink and blue fires. Gracie turned to Dr. Malloy. "Kathleen, this is your story to tell. They came to you. Everyone, please sit down." Dr. Malloy walked to the center of the room and waited while everyone settled. On the floor, Jamey felt Henry lean into him. He was glad to sit down. His ankle hurt. When everyone was still, Kathleen began. "I am a secret keeper, as was my mother and her mother before her and her mother before her and her mother before her. They had many names. The Aesir and the Vanir, the gods of Asgard. The 12 Olympians, the Tuatha. The Danann. Pantheons of deities in many times and many cultures. Zeus, Odin, Dagda. Lugh, Apollo. Epona, Machu, and Rhiannon. Conatii, the great hunter, and Selu, the corn woman. Enlil, Hecate, Demeter, Kali, Astarte. Inanna. They have had many names. Gods we called them when they came here, beings with powers that we called divine or supernatural. They came from somewhere else. They came here to hide. To escape trouble where they had been, trouble they had caused. They grew bored. They made the pets toys out of the matter of this world, shapeshifters like werewolves, selkies, swanfolk, and others, centaurs, pans, merfolk, and monsters, dragons, hydras, basilisks, gorgons. Not all lived, but many did. Many are still here, living hidden lives with protective glamours they wear. Like second skins. The gods grew bored again, as they do. Precious little in this world holds their attention for very long. So they turned from creating by themselves to creating with the daughters of men. And thus came into being the Nephilim, demigods we know as Hercules, Helen, Perseus, Beowulf, Enkidu, and the rest, and their descendants are gods. Spawn whom we call godlings. The monsters these demigods slayed were real. These battles with monsters amused the gods and held their attention for a while. Finally the trouble they made in the other place before here came looking for them, and once again they moved, leaving behind that which they had created. Pets whom they loved even more than the children we bore them. Before they left, they made the Watchers to protect the pets, to prevent us from knowing them as more than stories, to keep the magic hidden and away from us. One god stayed behind to finish making the Watchers and to set them in motion. He has many names. Loki, Coyote, Iktomi, Owlglass, Suro, Anansi, Puck, Gwydion, and Hermes. A shapeshifter, he was also known just as much as she. Eris, Apate, Aim no Yuzum no Mikoto, Mohini. Before he left to follow the others, he made one last joke, one last trick. But this time it was on the gods themselves. He hid a key Loki's last trick would be set in motion when a pet who isn't a pet and a spawn of the old gods found each other. Only they could find the key, but once found and used the lock open, the Watchers could be unmade pets set free from their shadows. Spells that made the Watchers would be undone and magic set free in our world. We witches have always been a part of humankind, but we are hidden too. This key would set us free. The Watchers never stop working to prevent this. They operate in secret, disguised in government, in churches, in schools. Thanks to the Watchers, learning knowledge is feared and hindered, avoided. Libraries close at dark. Thanks to the Watchers, we fear a long list of things from cell phones to computers, the internet, cameras, telescopes. We fear thanks to the Watchers. Dr. Malloy stopped speaking and everyone looked at Henry and Jamey. Jamey gulped. He felt far younger than 19 and somehow more naked than when they had been running around with Dr. Malloy. Us. He hated how high his voice sounded. Henry and me? Stop the Watchers? Find this key? He wished he could hear what the other witches were saying as they whispered to each other. Jamey was sure Henry could tell him what they were all whispering and that Henry could hear them distinctly with his wolf ears and his new extra senses. Dr. Malloy nodded. But we just met. We don't know anything. We don't know how to use magic. Not like we're superheroes with swords. What are we supposed to do? I barely know how to be a werewolf, Henry growled. Gracie covered a smile with her hands as muted laughter rippled through the other witches. Swords? You can learn, you can be trained. We will tell you what is expected. You will have a choice. Trained? To do what? Jamey gulped, hating how they seemed to be laughing at him. His squeaky voice didn't help. When Henry squeezed his hand again, he jerked away. Jamey so badly wanted to run, but where? Up the stairs into a tangle of magical wards and charms that locked doors and made shields and nets? He wasn't even sure he could run. His ankles still hurt when he put pretty much any weight on it. And his fear. He could feel it at his throat, in his stomach. He felt sick. The flames on all the candles grew brighter and longer, extending into spears of light. There was no way out. 3 alarms. Yes. 3 warnings. Public disclosure. Mundane witnesses. Yes. The witnesses were memory cleansed. 1 died of a heart attack. And the 2 violators escaped with the help of a witch who is now also a violator. Ella nodded again and tried not to flex her wing muscles. She had only partially resumed human form and had yet to resume a human persona. That she thought wouldn't happen. Black gloves and boots concealed her talons. The ankle-length, long-sleeved, high-neck dress concealed her reddening skin. She licked her fangs with her still long tongue. However, her tail, horns, and wings had retracted. The last time this happened in one of her cycles, those 2 girls had been different. 2 quick kills had taken care of everything. You know the protocols. Ella leaned back in her chair and waited for the senior watcher of the southeastern U.S. to release her for the hunt in both human and watcher form, which was what must happen next, but only at his command. Asking her whether she knew the protocols was a ritual question. Ella had never been taught the protocols because they were part of her DNA. She looked into the senior watcher's now red eyes, watched as his fangs and talons lengthened as he flicked his forked tongue. She understood. Jamey. Jamey. What? Jamey snapped as he turned to close the door to their bedroom, wishing he could sleep somewhere else alone, but the other doors he had tried on their floor were locked. All those witches assumed they were lovers. Well, they were just not a couple yet. Not yet. Sort of. Fuck, everything was happening too fast. What do you want? Jamey said a little more gently, feeling guilty. It wasn't fair to blame everything on Henry, but he couldn't help it. He'd had a temper tantrum in the ritual room, not Henry. It wasn't Henry's fault. All the witches had been looking at the 2 of them and whispering about the poor boy who was so young and so much had happened to him, and on and on. Jamey had never been more confused in his life. He was angry and upset and ashamed, and he wanted to hide, and he wanted Henry, but if he could walk away, his life would be so uncomplicated. Never mind the magic. He hooked his cane on the dresser and sat on the bed to peel his shirt over his head. He looked up at Henry, who had already taken his pants off and stood there half naked, holding his pants in front of him. Jamey pulled his shirt back on. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to get you into this, Henry said hesitantly. clearly not sure what to say next. If we hadn't kissed that first time, none of this would have happened. If I hadn't made a pass at Franklin, if I hadn't kissed Bennett, none of this would have happened. My mother was right. You kissed me first and we've done a lot more than kiss since then, but that's not what got us hunted by watchers or made us whatever the witches think we are, Henry said carefully. He turned away and stepped into the bathroom, dropping his shirt on the floor behind him. When he was done, he came out and sat next to Jamey, keeping his hands in his lap. Just 2 days ago we were working at Larkin's. Nobody asked us if we even wanted any of this. It's not fair, Jamey grumbled. Henry very carefully reached out to touch Jamey's bare knee. Jamey looked at his hand, then at Henry's rising erection. He pushed Henry's hand away. I'm tired and I want to slow things down, at least the things I can slow down. And I'm mad. It's not my fault and it's not fair for you to be mad at me. Henry frowned. It's not fair that I can't go home, and I'm supposed to be some hero and nobody asked me if I wanted to be one either. Besides, I've got a headache. Okay, that was stupid. Let's just go to sleep. Get the light. Okay. Henry turned off the light, lay down beside him, and touched him with the tips of his fingers. Jamey heard him roll over. He wanted to touch Henry back to touch his erection and Henry to touch his. Instead he lay quiet and waited a long time for sleep. The dream, running low close to the ground, pushed Henry awake with a sudden jerk. He threw his head back against his pillow until he caught his breath. He stretched, feeling his joints pop and snap. Rubbing his eyes, Henry sat up and reached for his feet. Another stretch. Throwing back the spread, he got up. Stretched again. He had to needed to run and run and run as a wolf. Jamey slept, curled up on his side, his red hair dark on the pillow, his edges indistinct in the dark. The only light in the room was the thin white line below the bathroom door. Henry collected his clothes from the floor and found the space between bed and dresser and bathroom and started dressing. His feet got caught in his shirt and pants and he tripped, banging his head on the dresser. Shit. What? Henry. Jamey's words were slurred with sleep. Jamey, I'm sorry for everything. I have to run and I'm sorry. "'Kay? Go run?" Jamey asked, clearly not awake, his words seemingly coming from far away. "Go back to sleep, I won't be gone long." Henry waited until Jamey's breathing slowed back down and whatever wakeful tension there had been dissolved into the darkness. He stroked that bright red hair, the color invisible in the dark, with the tips of his fingers, then quickly pulled on his jeans and t-shirt. "I have to go run as a wolf, Jamey. Maybe down to the river. Dr. M told me. They know my human smell, but not the wolf. I gotta go, I have to shift, I have to change." He ran up the stairs, wishing Jamey were going with him, that Jamey would be there at the back door waiting for him, but he couldn't ask, not yet. He couldn't risk Jamey saying again, "No, go away, it's too soon, I didn't ask for this." By the time he had stripped off his clothes and opened the back door into the cold, Henry's body hair was thickening into fur and growing down his back, across his chest. Claws were replacing his fingernails and toenails. Changing hurt and felt so good at the same time. It was sweet pain that he had never changed into a wolf awake before didn't matter. The wolf ran down the back steps, across the stone courtyard, across the gravel driveway, and up and over the fence, through the church next door's parking lot, and finally the empty street. Paused there to howl. And then it ran and ran and ran. "What happens if we don't take this quest? You're saying that Jamey and me are the only ones who can do this, right?" Henry looked first at Jamey, then at Dr. Malloy and Ronan and Gracie. It was mid-morning after the Council of Covens meeting the night before. They sat in what Bonnie called her Florida room, which seemed to be an add-on to the ground floor of a house that was far larger than the outside appearance suggested, most of the extra space underground. How big, Henry wondered, was that ritual room, and how many rooms and floors were below ground? 3 walls of the Florida room were almost all windows. The 4th wall was mostly the door leading into the kitchen and enough wall space for more bookshelves. The room itself was simple: a couch, armchairs, a low coffee table, and 2 lamps. A coffee service was on the table. Bonnie and her cats and dog were downstairs, somewhere engaged in what she would only describe as a project. Outside was November, an overcast gray sky, winter bare trees, and more ravens. Why ravens looked after werewolves he didn't know, but they did. The Raven Inn. The house had clearly adopted him. Henry wished he could go for another run, like he had last night, and this time take Jamey with him to see if he could remember how to fly. Henry had gone to the James River and pony pasture rapids and taken off down a riverside path, to be awake, to be running, and experience the smells, the earth on his feet, the voice of the river, to feel his forelegs stretch, to smell the world. He had run until exhausted there and back again. He had so needed to run and to hunt. Henry told no one about the squirrel the wolf had eaten, how it tasted, the warm flesh and the hot blood, the beating heart. I know it's not fair. Gracie interrupted his reverie as she set her cup down on the table. I understand that you haven't had time to even remotely process what has happened to the two of you. I'm having a hard time processing all this myself. There's just so much at work, and the changes that will come are enormous. I'm a bit scared of them. She cleared her throat. Be that as it may, if the pet who is not a pet and the godlings say no to this search for a missing key, the Watchers will hunt you and kill you anyway, and even if they don't, you will have to hide the rest of your lives. They will try to kill us for helping you. They will never, ever stop. They can't. The gods hardwired them to suppress any public expression of magic and disclosure of the pets. That suppression includes termination. A lot of genies have been let out of a lot of bottles. We've been heading for another magical eruption for some time. What has happened will make it worse. The Watchers know this. They've squelched such eruptions in the past, but this is going to require a greater effort. The whole world is more dangerous now. Kathleen, Gracie added, apparently struck by an unexpected thought. What? About your house, your job, and yours, Ronan? Dr. Malloy nodded. I took emergency leave, and so did Ronan, based on the whole burnt-up house thing. She looked at Jamey and Henry. Taking the quest is one choice, not taking the quest is another. Sometimes the Watchers, if they can suppress or control the magical eruption, will let disclosers go. You could hide in this house and wait, take that chance. The wards and charms that protect it are so strong that to break them would be a public expression of magic no Watcher is likely to risk. Even going outside just beyond the driveway would be dangerous. But it's your choice. Bonnie just walked her dog, and Henry did a wolf run by the river last night, and they're both safe. This whole thing doesn't make sense, Jamey said. Of course it didn't. Not on the other planet they had left behind in Larkin's, along with their clothes. The Watchers haven't tracked you here yet, but they will. Gracie looked away, as if she had run out of her allotted one-on-one contact time. She seemed suddenly uncomfortable. I am guessing we have 3, maybe 4 days before they find us and attack. Even so, you shouldn't take chances like last night. Not when you're unprotected. All right. But why me and Henry? Why has the universe chosen us to fulfill this prophecy? Because the joke you talked about seems to be on us. What choice do we have, really? Why you and Henry? Nobody can answer that question, Jamey. Ronan poured another cup of coffee and looked around for the creamer, rolling her eyes, Dr. and picked it up from where it sat on the coffee table right in front of Ronan, and handed it to him. I can tell you it was meant to be, and that it was ordained by God and by Goddess that you two would be the ones in the right place at the right time, but that wouldn't answer your question, would it? There is no answer as to why but you two are meant to do this. So now you must decide. He leaned back in his chair. There is another option. There's sort of a magical witness protection program. You have to be under a special kind of glamour some of the time, but your appearance, your scent is changed or obscured, and you're taken to live far, far away. You can't go home, of course, but it would mean that you wouldn't be locked up in here all the time either. And I know Kathleen and Gracie think the Watchers won't use their big guns here to break the wards because they're afraid of exposure. I'm not so sure about that. Think they will. The protection program is your best bet. Think about it. But where do God and Jesus fit into all this? Jamey thought of his parents, and their certainty they knew what God wanted, and who and what Jesus loved and didn't love. That there was a witness protection of a sort made him feel a little better about their choices, not that any of the choices were good ones. Jesus isn't an old god. The old gods aren't even really gods. They were powerful beings from some other place. Aliens, Henry said, interrupting Ronan. I think so, Dr. Malloy said. These two don't. Genetic incompatibility, I would argue genetic manipulation, and I think they were real gods, but never mind that right now, Ronan. We can Talk about Jesus another time. Gracie dismissed the question as she carefully poured half a cup of milk and added half a cup of coffee. That's one more unanswerable question. She stared down at the table. The question is what? Will the pet who isn't a pet and the godling decide? She took a sip of the coffee and smiled at the boys. Go take a walk. I know what I said, but it's safe enough this morning, I think. Let me get a few extra wards, some scent changers. Those pentacles won't be quite enough. Jamey and Henry sat on the river rocks in the pony pasture rapids. The rocks looked like the backs of small gray whales surfacing in the James River, with the water breaking and rushing around them. The cold, fresh air was a welcome change from the house. The clouds across the river brushed the tops of the trees, promised rain. They had passed joggers and dog walkers on the way down from the Cherokee Road safe house, but nobody else was out on the rocks. A few ravens, who now seemed to be Henry's constant escort, along with the one on his shoulder, were perched in nearby trees. You do smell different, Jamey. Henry broke the awkward silence. It's like an extra layer. I can still smell you, but there's something extra and different on top of that. Enough to throw a watcher off, I guess. No matter what Gracie said, I could go back home. I should go and pretend none of this ever happened. Henry skipped another rock out over the river, and then another before replying, that won't stop the watchers from coming after you. I bet they would go after your folks too. Do you want to risk that? It's all the same to you, isn't it? No family, nobody, what do you care? You've got nothing to lose, Jamey snapped. Seeing the expression on Henry's face made him feel awful and ashamed. I don't want to hide forever. Hiding forever, even disguised, isn't much of a life. Henry stared out at the water. He grinned a little. If we stay there, that Pomeranian Gunther might wind up killing us anyhow. But we don't have a choice, do we? The witches say we do. Yeah, I know. Hide here or go into hiding someplace else, or wait to see if the watchers are satisfied with suppressing the magical eruption or whatever it is. Jamey took a deep breath of river, of wet rock, of cold air. He had never been to this place in Richmond before. Would they be able to come back? Were some of the people he ran into in his regular ordinary life not who they seemed? Do you think we should do it, no matter the risks? Some of his anger and fear abetted. None of this was Henry's fault. Jamey felt guilty for having given him such a hard time about it. He leaned over and squeezed Henry's hand. An apology. All my life I have felt coming moments that were special moments I learned to pay attention to. I feel them. I feel the weight of their meaning, their importance, even if I don't know what that importance is or what they are going to mean. You sound like Dr. M. Henry cast another stone. Is this one of those moments? Jamey asked. What does it mean? We jump off the cliff. I just wish I wasn't so scared of all of it, the quest, you and me. Everything. I'm scared too. I keep telling you that. Let's go tell them they found their heroes. Will look for their key. And we are doing it for ourselves, not for them, so we can have our lives back. We get this done, get the watchers off our backs, then you can go home and they'll be safe if that's what you want to do, Henry said. I don't know what I want to do. What about you? It was crazy. Henry could find the courage to volunteer to be a hero and go on a quest and fight monsters, yet he was terrified to tell Jamey that even though they had only known each other a few weeks, he was sure he loved him and that he didn't want his old life. He wanted to build a new one with Jamey, even if he really didn't know what that meant. But just because he wanted something didn't mean he would ever get it or deserved it. I don't know what I want to do either. Henry shrugged. Maybe work at Larkin's again? But Dr. M said we couldn't. Come on, let's go to the safe house. Ronan, Dr. M, and Gracie looked up from the counter in the kitchen when the boys returned. They had started preparing lunch, more sandwiches. Bonnie didn't stock a big variety of food. Well, Dr. Malloy asked. Wait, I want you two to understand one thing. You can say no. We'll figure it out, we'll help you hide. Jamey and Henry looked at each other and nodded in tandem. We'll go on your quest, Henry said softly. Yeah, I guess we'll do it. But I have no idea how and what or where, Jamey said in a surly tone. Dr. M and Ronan wanted him to take this quest. That was easy to figure out. Gracie, he couldn't tell. Henry wanted to hold Jamey's hand. Jamey crossed his arms instead. We'll start your training tomorrow, Dr. Malloy said. All right then, let's eat lunch. Chapter 5. November 18, 2009. The knowledge you both need is right here and here. With her left hand, Dr. Malloy tapped Jamey on his forehead with her right. Henry. It's encoded in your cells, your DNA. It's hidden in those childhood memories we've been talking about. It's your heritage. This is something the old ones themselves had and included in their pets. As for dreams, remember what a Tibetan teacher and healer said. Dreams are a reservoir of knowledge and experiences, yet they are often overlooked as a vehicle for exploring reality. Remember that some of what you see and do in your dreams is real or was. The time in these dreams will flow differently and last longer. You will be moving in and out of your memories. They were all in the ritual room. Henry, Jamey, Dr. Malloy, Ronan and Bonnie, including the raven a few feet from Henry, the Siamese perched on Bonnie's shoulder, and the gray and white cat at her feet. A small fire burned in a brazier in the center of the pentacle inscribed on the floor. Candles burned at the four corners of the room and on the altar. Jamey rubbed his hands up and down his arms, wishing the room were warmer and that for this magic it wasn't required they be naked. Dr. M had explained they had to be as newborns for this knowledge to be awakened. Henry looked perfectly comfortable, but then he went barefoot outside in the November cold. The witches were in robes, midnight blue and glittering stars, black and dove gray. If it were just us, or even if just her and us. Earlier in the morning, right after breakfast, Dr. Malloy had explained what was going to happen. They had been sitting at the dining room table. She had a cup of coffee in both hands, as if collecting and storing warmth. She and Ronan had cooked scrambled eggs, toast, bacon, juice, and coffee. The food made Jamey homesick. His mother cooked a similar meal every school morning for years. Breakfast remains littered the table. Ronan had gone down to the ritual room to start preparations and renew the protective spells while Bonnie got ready to go off on her motorcycle. Why, Henry had whispered to Jamey as he smeared butter on the whole wheat toast, would a witch have a motorcycle? Unfortunately, he hadn't whispered softly enough. Bonnie frostily told him the whole business about brooms was pretty much a myth and only a few witches could fly, those with God's blood, and besides she liked motorcycles, thank you very much, the bigger the better. She stalked off with Gunther in a backpack, muttering something about little twerps who didn't really know anything. A few minutes later the bike roared. A werewolf should be your teacher, Henry, and a godling yours or Loki himself, Jamey. Dr. Malloy ignored the noise. But those with the old ones' blood are almost all like you. Most don't know they have special abilities, or they remember such things only in dreams, or they convince themselves what they remember had to be a dream like you did. The pets have all been hiding for so long, centuries, that they are terrified of coming out of their shadows, their secret places, their dark forests. For many, if not most, they can't even imagine they can. They don't trust witches. I did try to find them. I left messages, but we can't wait. It's been 2 days since the incident at Larkin's and the fire, and almost every watcher in Central Virginia has been awakened. They will find this house and attack soon. It's like she's giving us a class lecture. Jamey inwardly groaned. He recognized the signs as she went deeper and deeper into professor mode. And if the key is found and the watchers are in essence turned off, we'll be set free too. She'd gone on to tell them that what they needed to know could be found through something she called lucid and guided instructional dreaming, which they first had to learn how to do, along with studying the symbolic language of dreams, and then looking into the memories that would awaken secrets hidden in their cells, inscribed on their DNA. She kept saying she would be their initial guide before helping each of them down a private path. Jamey felt uncomfortable. This sounded like the kind of science stuff his mother had claimed came from Satan. Still, all of it was sort of exciting. Now they were down in the ritual room. 2 mattresses lay on the floor side by side between the altar and the pentacle. Dr. Malloy, with a flick of her fingers, lit the candles at one corner of the mattresses, then handed a bright silver goblet to Henry, who, after sniffing the contents, repeated what she had taught them had to be said. This is valerian, to take me to the land of dreams. This is the stone to make the dreams teach true. He gulped down the hot liquid. Jamey, wishing he could smell the way Henry could, did the same when Ronan handed him his silver goblet. They drank the valerian tea poured over a fluorite gem, which Dr. M said would help them draw in positive energy to fuel their dreams. When both boys were lying down on the mattresses, Ronan gave each of them a piece of fluorite. Jamey's was a shimmering gold color, Henry's a deep green. Ronan lit the incense scattered about the room in what Jamey's father would have called smudge pots. Jamey pushed the memory of his father away. Ronan added more incense crystals to the pentacle's fire. The air in the room grew warm and close and redolent of cinnamon, cloves, and other spices Jamey couldn't identify. Dr. Malloy knelt down between the two boys and laid a hand on their foreheads. Everyone in the room repeated in unison, "To you, stone, I speak. Grant me the wish this work to find." Again and again, more slowly each time, until Jamey and Henry slid down into sleep. Henry was walking down the narrow path into the green darkness of a forest, too. The darker moving green of the river at the end of the path. Jamey had gone a different way. Dr. Malloy had said goodbye to both of them at the edge of the forest. Henry knew a boat of some kind waited for him, to take him to where he would find his mother, then his father. He remembered so little of his mother, and of his father even less. He desperately wanted to see his parents' faces. He had wanted this, to see them all his life. A smooth red path led Henry over the twisted roots of the tall, thick-trunked trees of this place. He tried to see into the forest on either side, but the farther inside he looked, the less distinct the trees became. The sky above him, a narrow break in the forest canopy, was midnight blue, the color of dear M's robes. The stars of her robe burned above him. The wind keened in the trees. He heard himself breathing. A curve and he was at the river. He stood at the edge of a dock, the water below his bare feet, and more stars over his head, and the river was wide and dark, and it whispered to him. Henry remembered what Dr. M had taught him and what they had practiced, that he could control what he did and where and how. He called then, and a canoe glided up, silver and white. Henry had never been in a canoe, but here, after asking for the knowledge, he knew how to hold the paddle, how to make the stroke, and the canoe slid out in the water. He could see the moon, orange and golden, muted behind a veil of clouds. He watched as the sky cleared, a far wind shredding the moon's veil, tearing away bits and pieces until it was gone. He paddled on one side, then the other, the water gilded with moonlight, to the middle of the river, where the current caught him and he could sit back and be carried along. On either side, the riverbank was dense with dark trees and shadows. Around a bend, beneath low trees whose leaves brushed against his hair, Henry saw the next dock on the far side of the river, and beyond that, a fence, a gate, and stairs behind the fence leading up and into the trees. A lantern glowed on the first landing above the dock. He climbed out of the canoe onto the dock and watched as the canoe floated away, slowly dissolving into the water, silver and white staining the black like spilled paint, until it was gone. When he touched the gate, it swung open, creaking like something out of an old movie. At the top of the stairs was a house built on stilts and strung with lights, like a Christmas tree. Henry opened the door carefully and slowly. Before he saw his mother, he heard the beating of her heart. "Mama," he called out, and he was small, and there she was holding him, licking his face, snuffling his neck, murmuring what a good pup he was, such a good boy. Her lips were so close to his cheek her words moved on his skin. She was a wolf with golden eyes, and Henry was her pup, and they played in the forest, in the yard, even in the house. Each time she touched him he remembered who he was and what that meant. Now Henry was in his crib. He wished for his father, and the dark shadow he remembered behind his mother stood above him, and he could see his father's face, and he reached for it with his paws, then his hands reached for the hand that came out of the shadow, where he could see a face, dimly and briefly, and the hand pulled back. He heard his mother call out his father's name. "Henry, no, stop, what's wrong? That's not a baby, that's a monster. What are you? I love you. Monster. Beast. Nightmare. You are a real bitch, aren't you?" At the touch of skin, the wetness of a tongue, of lips, of words and sounds on his flesh, a door slamming, feet running away, his body remembered, and he remembered. He needed no moon to change, although a full moon would give him greater strength and heighten all his extra wolf senses. Werewolves and the full moon were a myth left behind by the old gods. No more changing while sleeping. Henry could call the change, delay it, speed it up, although that was dangerous. But he could change as needed and as desired. His body needed to change. His body needed to run and howl. He needed to inhabit the world of sense. He needed to hunt. The change its energy could and did demand release. Change energy ebbed and flowed. It had to be renewed, it had to be sometimes left fallow. Change energy was also a product of stress. The more extreme, the greater the energy level. Henry's shadows, his disappearances in plain sight, were all the gift of camouflage. He knew how to be silent and invisible. Smells, sense of fear, of love, and of desire all had to be filtered and distinguished, sorted. Strength as wolf, as human. Recuperative power, self-healing. A body. Temperature and blood flow he could regulate and adjust to the weather. He no longer needed shoes for warmth or to protect his feet. Chocolate was not good for him. He would have to be careful with caffeine. Wolf mind, human mind. Henry remembered how to speak with ravens. The sound sank into his brain, into his cells, finding ancient memories of werewolves, human and wolf, and companion ravens calling to each other. Sounds gradually became words. Common tongue for werewolf and raven, a language taught by a tall, bright being, an old god. His body remembered. His heart remembered too. She whispered to him that she had wanted to live among the mundanes. She wanted to be accepted. She wanted to be normal. Mundanes had so much more. They weren't afraid all the time. They didn't live in the shadows. She'd wanted Henry to be a mundane like his father. She made Henry forget what he was, who he was. He remembered her hands on his head, pressing in. That was why she left him, why she made him forget. She never came back. At the end of Jamey's forest path was a dark green lake surrounded by an empty beach of white sand glowing in the moonlight. A raft waited for him at the end of a dock. The knowledge of how to launch and navigate the raft awaited him on the raft itself. When Jamey's bare feet touched the rough wood of the tree trunks lashed together, the information passed through his skin into his feet and up into his brain. He wished, as he steered the boat, that he had learned the constellations. He wondered who populated the night sky above him, and what their stories were, and then he remembered Pisces, Andromeda, Orion, and his bright belt. And he knew someone before him, who had carried the genes. Learned these stories too. Another dock waited for Jamey across the lake. Stairs led up a short green hill to a house hidden just inside the shadows of the forest. At the top of the hill the forest was gone, and Jamey found himself in the parking lot of the row of townhouses his parents had lived in when he was very small, outside Fredericksburg in Spotsylvania County. A path behind led into the wood. His mother had gone walking with him, in and out of shadows and sunlight. Numbers in black were on the side of the door, but this door was golden. No cars, no people, just trees, grass, patches of daffodils, dandelions. The grass and trees beyond the townhouses blurred into shadows. He was inside the memories he had shared with Henry, but this time he knew he would consciously remember how to do what his younger self had done by accident. Jamey opened the door as it started to rain. He looked up at a frowning face, his mother. No, Jamey, you cannot go outside. It's raining. Stay in here, you have a room full of toys, and stop fussing. You hear me? Angela's coming over for coffee and I'm going to be busy. She walked off, leaving him alone in his bedroom, in the middle of the throw rug by his bed, surrounded by toys. A teddy bear sat on his left, a stuffed giraffe on his right, and all around a scattering of tiny cars and trucks, and building blocks and Legos. A mobile turned slowly overhead. Jamey wanted to go outside. She had promised him he could go outside. It couldn't be raining that hard. Fuming, Jamey got up and followed his mother's path out through the bedroom door, down the hall, past all the pictures hanging there with their strange faces, until he found himself at the back door. He heard his mother's voice somewhere nearby in the house, and another woman's voice he didn't recognize. They were laughing. Fine. I'm going outside. Jamey couldn't reach the doorknob. I want to go outside. I want to go outside. Now. Jamey pushed against the unmoving door, the backyard firmly pictured in his head, and he was outside. On the other side of the fence, in the rain, behind the Curry backyard, was the beginning of a forest that, to Jamey, was infinitely big, stretching forever into shadows. Now, who was watching him from the trees? There he was, a green man with pointed ears just inside the trees. Jamey nodded and waved. He had seen the green man before. In a small, light-dappled glade, a tall, red-haired man stood facing the green man. They were deep in the forest. Jamey was aware as he watched them that the two knew each other, and that this meeting had been planned. They had come to this hidden place for a purpose. Above them a dark sky. In the green man's hands was a sword. But I don't know how to use a sword, Jamey protested as the green man handed him the bright silvery blade. He did. The one before you, your ancestor. His cells recorded what he learned. You bear those cells. He battled monsters. Jamey stood at the top of a green hill. He was 6 and his teacher had sent him to retrieve a left-behind dodgeball which he could see bright yellow. At the far edge of the empty playground, he had started running and running. And the wind had caught him or he had caught the wind, and for one supreme moment he was riding the wind, he was flying. I wasn't dreaming. Mama tried to make believe that I was, and she got so mad at me. His mother yelled at him, put that thing down. Put it down now. Jamey was 8 and playing in his room with the stick sword he'd made. A lamp lay broken on the floor. He had scratched a long line on the wall. Shards of light were mixed with shards of glass. He remembered the secret in his mother's eyes, the same secret he had seen in his grandfather's eyes and the eyes of his mother's brother and sister. They had once dreamed of flying, 2 dreams that weren't dreams. He could step through walls, bricks and stones and glass and steel. He could jump across miles, and afterwards he would sometimes have to rest. He could fly. He could carry others with him in the air. He could use a sword, a shield, and a bow and arrow. He knew why the Watchers could only be fought with a magic sword, and not with guns or bombs. Watchers could only be fought with magic. He could shape light. In his hand, light was malleable. It had texture in it, had weight and could be thrown. As Jamey held it, the light grew warmer and warmer until it became a fire that did not burn his hand. Henry and Jamey stood at each other's side on a little beach of jumbled rocks and yellow sand, the river a few feet away, the forest with its green and black shadows pressed against their backs. The night sky above them was clear. Jamey had never seen so many stars. This time he knew their names and their stories. How'd you get here? Our dreams were supposed to be separate, right? We each had things we could only learn alone. That's what Dr. M said, didn't she? Jamey held a shining sword in his left hand. With his right he brushed against Henry's thigh and hips, as if only the slightest of touches was permissible. Henry wasn't having it. He grabbed Jamey's hand and held on. I don't know how or why we are here together. Well done. You have made it this far, much farther than the last 2. A tall, bright being with hair like fire stood before them, a few feet away, just above the quick water of the river. Male, female, it was impossible to say. The last 2 died. The Watchers killed them. The ones before them the same. To find the key you must take the next step together and all the steps after that. The very next step is over water and under stone and earth, in and out of darkness into the earth. Where do we go to take the step? Jamey asked. I left behind this memory of me, but it can only be seen by those who get this far and have learned what is here. Other memories remain for you to find at each step ahead. The next step? What is it? Henry asked. The path is there, but it has yet to be found. Your guide will point you in the right direction. Say the necessary words. The being's hair sparked and flamed and bits of fire fell on the boy's skin, shocking them. Then it grew brighter and brighter until there was only brightness. Henry and Jamey woke up in the ritual room, side by side on the mattress, where they had started. Saturday before dawn was really cold, but Henry, who lagged behind the others, didn't mind so much. His bare feet on the pavement barely registered the chill. Even so, he didn't want to go for a pre-dawn walk at Pony Pastures Rapids on the James. A moment was coming, weighted and charged with meaning, pressed against him. He wanted to ask Jamey what he thought it might be, but he couldn't. Since their guided dreaming, Jamey had insisted they sleep in separate rooms, telling Henry he needed some space to process things, what his body had remembered on top of the sex, the Watchers, the fire, the quest, the weird instructions of the fire-haired being, who had to be Loki. Henry had only nodded because he had no idea what to say, but he understood it was more than that. He didn't know how to be part of a couple, how to love another person, which was a perilous adventure in and of itself. He felt awkward and clumsy. Now in the gray-blue pre-dawn light, Henry still didn't know what to say to Jamey. He smelled Jamey's desire and his fear and his love, and that, Henry thought, just about sums up how things are between the 2 of us. Jamey had asked him out first, kissed him first, and, after listening to his mother's fears, embraced them and pulled away. Even though Henry knew Jamey's mother was wrong, he envied Jamey having her, wanting to please her. Jamey had had dream of desire and sex, and they had made love in Larkin's and again in their bedroom in the safe house. Then he got scared, and not just about this crazy quest. Henry had cornered him last night just before Jamey had gone into his bedroom, across the hall from the one they had shared. The hall was thick with a smell of desire. "Jamey, why are you hiding from me?" Henry put his hand on the doorknob before Jamey could turn it and slip inside the room. Jamey couldn't answer at first. When he did, the words came slowly, as if speaking them was painful, as if the words themselves had sharp edges. "I'm scared. I'm scared of what people will say and do if they see us together as a couple. I'm scared my mother might be right." Henry stared at him. "Your mother isn't here. Just me. I can smell how much you want me. Jamey, please don't do this." "I'm sorry." Jamey closed the door. Henry stood in front of the closed door for a long moment, listening to Jamey moving inside, his feet on the floor, turning down the bed, lying down. That had been last night. Except for a very bundled-up man walking his hyper Shih Tzu and a woman with her border collie, they had had Granite Hall Avenue and now Rockfalls Drive to themselves. Neither the man nor the woman noticed them, thanks to the glowing shield net Dr. M had cast around them. The two dogs had, on the other hand, gone berserk, which drove both the man and woman crazy. Riverside Drive and the park were just ahead. Henry liked this neighborhood. Thick with trees, its now sleeping houses and curving streets that led down to the river. The trees were in between fall and winter. On one side of the street, patches of gold, scarlet, purple and crimson. On the other, dying russet and brown and bare branches. Cedars and pines in shades of green. In this brick house, a family? Were they all asleep? Was someone up making coffee, listening to the radio? In the next house, a couple? "Hey people, look outside, see the werewolf, the witches and the godling." He had asked Dr. M why he could find nothing about what had happened in the Richmond Times-Dispatch, or on Channel 6 or any Richmond station. It was like the magic shield nets were always up. She had nodded. "In a way they are, Henry. The Watchers have made public awareness of magic, and the magical foolish through a long campaign of misinformation and lies. They are masters of cover-up, and they take advantage of people's desire for, and belief in, a world that makes sense, that is logical and orderly. A flying saucer would have to land on the White House lawn at high noon, in front of a crowd of reporters and TV cameras, before some people would believe in aliens. Even then, there would be doubts and accusations of fraud and claims that it was all faked, that it was some media stunt. There really are people who believe the moon landings were faked, and not just that," she added, shaking her head. "It's even worse what they have done to make it almost impossible for people to find out the truth, to get in touch with other people who have seen the same kinds of things. Look at how libraries are regulated, at what happened to the internet, to cell phones." She burst out laughing. "Jamey, you should see your face." Henry could tell it was all Jamey could do to hold back making a sign against evil or running away. Dr. Malloy got serious again. "The internet is not evil and cell phones are not satanic. That's their propaganda." Henry shrugged. He didn't know how many times he had overheard complaints about how much internet service cost, never mind cell phones. "I'd rather live in one of these houses, even if I am a lone wolf. What would it be like to be in a pack, a real family, like in all these houses?" His father had attacked him. His mother had defended her pup from his father, and she had made the pup forget. A handful of years later, she'd suppressed his compulsion to change. His mother had left him then in a church, hoping he would be raised as a mundane. That had sort of worked. Henry wondered what he would say to either of them if he met them, and what they would say to him. He wanted to be able to love them. He wanted to tell them he was furious with them. Henry walked in the middle of the empty street behind Dr. M and Ronan, Jamey and Gracie, flickering in and out of camouflage mode for sight and sound. Henry could smell Jamey's irritation, and he knew Jamey was purposefully not looking back. At least Jamey's sprained ankle was better. Dr. M and Ronan walked side by side in the middle of the group, occasionally checking to be sure Henry was still there. He flickered out of camo when they did. Dr. M's staff tapped on the pavement as she walked. Not to worry, she had Told him the glamour mute sounds too like your camouflage. He asked last night why she didn't have a wand like they did in Harry Potter. Rowling made that up, she had said. Well, not so much made it up as she pulled it out of a lot of the old stories. Some witches had wands, some had staffs, and some neither. Gracie, for example, carried a wand. Ronan neither wand nor staff. His hands were enough. Henry smelled the others as well. Dr. M and Ronan were afraid of what might happen, what could happen of the Watchers. They also reeked of sex, and he tried not to imagine what they must have done the night before. Gracie was very, very nervous and agitated, and something dark was pressing her. Even in this cold she was sweating. She smelled upset and afraid. He wished he could help her, tell her it was going to be okay. He and Jamey were going to pass their tests, but he didn't know her well enough to intrude, let alone casually chat with her. She reminded him too much of his first-grade teacher. That woman had scared him. Jamey carried a sword. When he had awakened from their guided dreaming, that had been the first thing he had asked for. You know nothing about swords, and this is the 21st century. Who fights with swords? Henry stared at him as he sat up from where they'd dreamed in the ritual room. Why not ask for a laser or a gun? Or a lightsaber? I sort of do now because my body remembers. I'm supposed to have a sword, not a gun. And except for what you can find at Toys R Us, lightsabers aren't real. Lucas made them up. I know that, Henry had muttered. I'll get Jamey a sword, Ronan said, to both boys' surprise. And I'll tell you both why Jamey has to carry a sword and fight with it. A sword and spelled. And magic like this one will be. Nothing else will stop the Watchers. Bullets might slow them down, but for these guys only magic and the magical. Right, Jamey? Jamey nodded. Later he had told Henry he learned that in his dream. Jamey had been more than a little nervous about spending time with Ronan, but no more than Henry himself was, because he was afraid Ronan would think he was stupid or something. At least Jamey had done a year at VCU. Henry had struggled to get through high school. There had been no need to worry. Ronan was a good guy. Even though Jamey would be the one to wield the sword and not Henry, Ronan taught them both how to fight, and was pleased their bodies remembered being taught before. For Jamey, each new swing of the blade carried memories. All that effort and the sword-fighting lessons and everything else. Henry thought they were all going to be furious with him when he told them he was having second thoughts about being their hero. Yes, he had promised. He now knew he could be like other werewolves and live inside a protective glamour. Forget about finding the next step and figuring out the stupid clues. But this had chosen him and Jamey. Henry wanted Jamey to stop being mad at him, so they could talk. Even more, he wished Jamey wasn't afraid of him. Henry sighed. Who was he kidding? He wasn't going to bag the quest, he was going to stick it out. Live the rest of his life in hiding in a safe house. Inside a glamour? I've done that, and now I'm going to stop living that way. He shook his head with a sad grin. The witches had their pet who wasn't a pet. But he wasn't all that heroic. Last night at dinner Gracie had explained why they had to get up before dawn. To take advantage of the natural magic of the hour. Protective wards and charms were usually set or enhanced and strengthened at dawn. Dr. Malloy had argued the point with her. The boys weren't doing magic, they were using the talents given to them by nature, by the universe. Magic was just a deeper understanding of that universe. Kathleen, this is important. Gracie rubbed her hands together over and over. If we're going to disrupt the lives of every witch in Central Virginia and eventually every witch everywhere, let alone the mundanes and the pets, we need to know if these two can fulfill their quest. Dawn is the best time down by the river for white magic. Henry smelled snow coming, which worried him. Snow in Richmond in November, as the weatherman had explained last night, was newsworthy. He wished again he knew how to talk to Jamey. Dr. M had told him to be patient. Wolves could be very patient. Did wanting to be with someone make him less of a lone wolf? More human? Did wanting someone make him more of a wolf? He wanted Jamey. He wanted his pack of two. Now there were almost all trees and only one or two houses on the street. Another turn onto Riverside and there was Pony Pasture Rapids, the gray rocks, the gray-green water of the river, and the sky gray and heavy with clouds. Gracie led them to an open grassy area between river and street. Pine cones littered the scraggly grass, and a thin line of trees separated the little green space from the river. Henry was glad when Gracie started a fire in the pit Ronan had dug for her the day before. Even if he could regulate his body temperature to minimize the cold, he was going to be naked and without his fur. For part of the time. It'll be dawn in about 20 minutes. Gracie stood by the fire and held up her wand. Dr. Malloy and Ronan were on her left, Jamey to the right. Jamey looked doggedly at the ground. I've been charged by the council to determine if you two are ready for this quest. Henry, do you want to go first? Henry nodded, sensing that if she got any more anxious she might explode. He hoped this demonstration would make Gracie feel better. He was glad the raven, who had chosen him, was with him. It was perched nearby. Henry undressed quickly, leaving everything in a pile on top of leaves and scattered pine straw. Maybe I should give up wearing underwear. One less thing to worry about. Henry heard the river behind him. He took a deep breath and called on the change, feeling its surge of energy into his blood, the sweet pain in his bones as he began to shift. The wolf looked up and barked as Jamey pulled out his sword and shot straight up into the air. It watched as Jamey waved his sword and scattered balls of white light that exploded one by one like blown dandelions. The fluffs of light smelled clean and bright as they drifted down to the ground onto his fur and disappeared. Henry suddenly smelled something different, something dark and dangerous. Then he heard it, a high keening, a call and a response. Gracie held her now glowing wand over her head. It wailed like a siren. Watch her drop down from the darkening sky, as if answering the wand. Gracie raised her other hand and pushed into the air, and the shield net shattered, raining bits and flecks of gold around them. Gracie, what are you doing? Oh my God. Dr. Malloy raised her staff to rebuild the shield net. Have you gone crazy? Ronan lunged at Gracie to stop her, to grab her wand, but she fought back, first slashing the air, then across his chest with her wand. He stumbled, his hands barely able to hold back a flowering stain of red. The wolf snarled and stepped toward her, and she retreated, shaking her wand, beating back the raven who dive-bombed her. She stopped when Jamey swung his sword and light rippled out and struck the ground in front of her. The incoming watcher keened again, its voice higher and more piercing than before, so high that they all winced in pain. Ronan jerked up and back like a fish snagged on a hook. He pressed his mouth closed as if something inside was forcing its way out. The watcher hovered in the air at the water's edge and keened a third time. The wolf, Jamey, and Gracie froze. Ronan answered. No, no, please, this can't be happening, Kathleen cried out. Ronan, no. Stop. Please, Ronan. The back of Ronan's coat ripped and wings unfolded. He looked at Kathleen, reached for her. He tried to speak, but his words were lost in a high wail, and his entire body jerked, lurched toward the waiting watcher. Horns erupted on his head as his skin shifted between shades of red. Fangs jutted out of his mouth, cutting his lips. Blood trickled down his face, out of his nose. More. Clothes ripped and a forked tail twitched behind him. He reached for her again. No, no, oh my God, no. Kathleen held out her hands, dropped them. Ronan. Ronan, oh Ronan, no, no. No. The incoming watcher screeched and dove directly at Kathleen. Ronan threw himself between her and the monster, knocking it back. Got to its feet. Hissing. Kathleen swung her staff, smashing it against the monster's face. Tearing at its wing. The creature staggered and fell, moaning. Ronan ran, stumbling toward the river. Then his wings caught the air and he flew, catching himself once. He was gone. Ronan, wait, don't, Ronan. Get out of my way, damn dog. Gracie waved her wand to shoot a bolt of white energy into the wolf's chest, pushing it and the raven back. She turned to Kathleen. I didn't want to do this. You made me. You wanted to let the mundanes know who we are, that we are real, that we are somehow like them. Gracie snarled. Have you forgotten what they did to us and will do again? Will not let that happen. Gracie gestured with her wand, and a golden rope spiraled up and out and looped around Jamey's foot as he hovered above them. She jerked and he fell, dropping his sword as he smashed into the ground. You will not hurt him. The wolf leaped on her and grabbed her wand hand with its teeth as she fought back, trying to toss attack spells that exploded trees and set the grass on fire. Some of her magic cut into his chest, and he shifted, his human voice crying out in pain. Another spell slammed the raven to the ground. She punched Henry hard in the chest and again in his stomach and his balls and knocked him down as his body shifted back and forth between wolf and boy, until he lay naked, curled up, trying to shield his body against the attacks. His chest was covered in blood, and he vomited all over himself. Jamey struggled to his feet, found the sword, and ran toward Henry. Gracie turned her wand out, but before she could do more damage, Jamey split her wand in half with his sword. The sword burned with a silver fire. How could you do this? Tears streaming down her face, Dr. Malloy swung her staff in a wide arc and a net fell around Gracie, pinning her to the ground. You've betrayed the circle. You have. The Watcher screeched in fury as it backed away from the other ravens who'd arrived. They tore at its wings, pecked and bit at its horns, its forked tail. It's calling for help. We have to get out of here. Dr. Malloy swung her staff in another arc, tossing out a shimmering net that fell on the Watcher, twisting and writhing around its wings and its long neck. Its skin smoked where the net touched it. Jamey, jump, take us out of here now before another Watcher comes. Dr. Malloy yelled, and she ran to Henry. Where? I don't know what to do. Help me, he's hurt. Jamey got to Henry first and held him as he threw up again, this time in great gasping heaves. Henry's raven staggered to the two boys, climbed on Jamey, held on. Anywhere, just do it. She grabbed his hand. Jump, Jamey. Do it. More Watchers flew over the water, their dark wings beating the air, and Jamey heard them screeching in fury. He jumped. The air snapped and Henry, Dr. M, the raven, and Jamey disappeared in a flash of white light, leaving the Watcher and Gracie writhing on the ground, both trapped by the magic net as two more Watchers streaked toward them. They brought the snowstorm